Growing up, how did you get along with your siblings?
Of course, we were different. Uh, it was never lost on us that although we were close in age and brothers, uh, we were different. Uh, Don was more athletic, while Don was more interested in athletic things, but oh, Bob was most nimble on his feet. Uh, but Bob wasn't interested in athletics at all. He could run an obstacle course in less time than either of us, but simply wasn't interested in athletics. Uh, Don was the best swimmer of the bunch. I learned to swim, but just marginally. Uh, the thing that really bonded us as brothers was early on that business growing up in Clinton and having the run of the neighborhood with the campus kids. And that little scout troop that we had, uh, that gave us some common ideas. But Don was never interested in Boy Scouts, and Bob was. Uh, but the difference between us, the differences were immediately evident. Uh, Bob sang in the choir because he knew Mother wanted him to. And besides, he could sing tenor, and they needed tenors. Uh, I sang because I loved it, and although my voice wasn't the greatest, I was able to get a spot in the choir singing bass. Don wasn't interested in music at all. When Bill came along, Bill was the musician of the bunch. Besides, he was Mother's special project. Uh, I think the greatest rivalry between us was between me and Don. We're only 15 months apart in age, and there were times when Don and I weren't the best of friends, but that's all right. He, he could outrun me, so if I had some bone to pick with him, I couldn't catch him before he got home, and that was the end of that. But no, as a whole, we've played together a great deal, and we made friends together, and it paid off in the later adventure when we built the cabin together. Uh, we wound up as partners. Uh, the idea was to build a log cabin in the Canadian wilderness, and in the summer of 1950, the project got underway. We had formed a partnership of five of us, three brothers and two friends, and we had put up the money, and we had applied to purchase the land, and we simply put together all our gear and drove to Canada and moved out on the island, and we went to work. I had spent the winter making plans, and I had drawn the cabin we were to build in great detail. And so I had, in my head, I had gone through all of the things that had to be done. But the marvelous thing was the variety of talents that we had in the brothers. A little brother Bill, the musician, was our cook. He was 15 years old, and it was good for him to get acquainted with his brothers, and whatever he cooked, we were going to be happy with. That's all there is to it. Don was the swimmer. Don was basically a negotiator. And he had some experience in game fishing. He taught us how to clean fish. When we had dealings to do with people, Don was our agent. Bob was the oldest one of the bunch. He was 27. We teamed Bob up with my friend Lou, who had grown up doing hard work with his back. And we made Bob and Lou the Department of Rocks and Cement. And they made a great team because Lou knew what he was doing and Bob was willing to do it. Bob hauled rocks and Bob mixed cement and Bob painted, and Lou was a good hard worker all the way, even though he had decided he was never going to do another hard day's work in his life. But Ed was not around there as much. Ed was an English major, and Ed contributed. It was Ed who got us the idea in the first place, and Ed who got us the cabin to stay at the summer before. And so there was our partnership. We had a variety of talents, and we had a lot of work to do, and we put it together that summer. And little brother Bill grew on the job. So that's the big experience that bonded the brothers at a later time in life. We were all out of college, except Bill, and into our careers, and we had something together that we had done together, that we owned together, and that's good for us all the way.
Okay. You've mentioned a couple instances of some mischief you've got into as children. Are there any other things that you or your brothers or your sisters got into? Any little trouble you got into? Oh yeah, we're running around the campus.
Oh goodness, yes. The campus, the main building of campus was a fascination. It was a big brick building with 4 entrances. There was a main front entrance and one out the back. An entrance at each end of the building. There's no way they could keep us out of that place. The people who worked there all had work to do, and while nominally the kids were not supposed to be in the campus building without the parents, we knew that building from top to bottom. And the top was fascinating. We found out that if you went up to the attic where all this stuff was stored, and if you climbed on top of this place, you could get into the tower at the top. And the tower was where the bell, there was a bell in the tower, and it was tall, and there were pigeons in it. And we used to go up and hunt pigeons in the tower with a BB gun. Well, that didn't cause any problem at all because the BB gun was quiet and it didn't do much damage to the metalwork up there. But one of our buddies who lived on a farm up there decided to come over with us one day and shoot pigeons, and he brought a .22, and that didn't exactly sit well. That shot holes in the metalwork. But that was one of our capers that kind of got out of hand.
What type of discipline would you get when you got in trouble for something like that?
Just talk. The Wartburg College family was an amazingly cohesive group. These people all were, their background was in the church. The German teacher at the college and his wife were my sponsors when I was confirmed. They had 2 children. There's an interesting story there. The German teacher, Dr. William Rodeman, had changed his name during World War I because his name was Hans William Rodeman, and the name Hans Rodeman sounded altogether too German. So he just dropped the Hans, and thereafter he became known as Bill, William, not Bill. But his son he named Hans William Rodeman, and he was about a year older than me. And his son was brought up quite strictly. And I knew Hans William Rodeman as one of the campus kids up there. Many years later, when I was teaching at Wartburg College, they hired a new history teacher. Guess who it was? Bill Rodeman. World War II wasn't very nice for German names either. And so son Hans William dropped the Hans also and hired on at Wartburg College as a history teacher as Bill Rodeman. So this was the Wartburg family, you see. And that's as typical of it as anything, I guess.
Did anybody else's parents ever discipline you at all then, since it was such a cohesive family?
No, no. When the kids went up and down through the building, when you went from the main floor up to the second floor, you came up the stairs and you were facing the college office, and there were people in the office there. They never bothered us. They never reported us. On the main floor, there was a room which was the faculty room, and there was the faculty mailboxes, and these were open, just slots, and there was just a row of slots where the mail came in, and we were all stamp collectors, and so we would look in the slots to see what interesting stamps had come in from where. And then we would buttonhole the prof and ask for the stamps. So we got acquainted this way. And socially, the campus was cohesive. It was a lovely situation. We knew lots of people. We knew adults, and they knew us. And they gave us the kind of freedom that our parents gave us. So our nemesis was the custodian, of course, Boss Hager. And Boss Hager was the only one who was inclined to get on our case if we were out of line. But we managed it all right.
Okay. Which brother or sister were you closest to?
Probably Don, because he was closest in age, and but there was, with 2 years apart, there was enough spacing so that we had different friends. I did, in my freshman year in high school, I joined the debate team, and Brother Bob was a senior on the debate team. In fact, all the rest of the debate team was seniors except me. And we had a fine time. The debate coach was my algebra teacher, and we had inter-school debate contests, and that was good for me too. And that's a time when Bob and I were together.
What was it like when a new baby came into your home, such as your little brother?
Oh, yeah. We were all, of course, aware of the fact that there was something new in the works, and about halfway between where we lived and where we went to school was a hospital. We'd go by. We went down the hill from the campus to where the road met Lincoln Highway, Highway 30, going through Clinton, and we followed Highway through down past Jane Lamb Hospital, and then off the road down to our school. And little brother Bill was born at that hospital. And of course, the question was, what are we going to name this? Let's see. I was just about 10 when he was born. I was 10 already because he was born in November, I think. So you see, we were 8, 10, 12. Is that right now? Bill was born in 34, and yeah, 8, 10, 12, and 14. Betty was born in 20, and so we had quite a lively discussion about what's the name of the little one, and so until we had a name for him, we made up a name for him. And so that emerging personality was called Ebenezer Abraham. And we discussed this, but for purpose of conversation, the coming baby was Ebenezer Abraham. And he arrived at a very difficult time. It was a difficult time for Mother, and it was a difficult time financially. The year 1935 was the year of the dispersion. The college was moving. We had been in Clinton all our lives, and now the college was moving to Waverly. And there was great dissension within the church about this move. And there was church politics was in the air. And for the summer, Dad was without a job. And what to do? Well, we'll farm out the kids. And so Betty stayed home with Mother because they had a baby. Bob went to Grandma's sister in Leola, South Dakota, to Aunt Lena and Uncle Walter, and spent the summer in Leola. Dickie, who was 10, went to Wendell, Minnesota, with Aunt Alma and her new husband, Edward. Alma and Edward Nelson were my foster parents on the farm in Wendell, Minnesota for the summer. And that was another great time to bond with Aunt Alma. And, oh, that was great for me. They were such a great couple. They lived with two siblings of Edward's, a sister and a brother, who lived in the same house with us. So we had quite a house full. But I learned to ride a horse. I would bring a team of 4 horses back from field work back to the barn at the end of the afternoon. I learned a few things on the farm. I learned how to break an axe handle and to fess up to it. And Edward was just great. So that was when we all came together again. After that, Dad did get his job in Clinton, and we left Waverly, and we were dispersed when we came back to Clinton. And in Clinton, we lived just a block off campus in a rented house. And following that was the winter of 1936, which was a doozy. There was a very, very big winter, like the winter of '97 in Eureka here. We had just snow we couldn't handle. Uh, and that was the winter that I had scarlet fever. And they had to disperse the family again because of quarantine. And I lived in this house with Mother and Betty and little Bill. And I had scarlet fever and survived that too and got my schoolwork done. But those were really tough times. Dad had a whole new job to put together, and one more in the family. Yeah, but that was living.
When you had scarlet fever, did you go to a doctor or did the doctor come to you?
The doctor came to the house. I, I just remember that I had an earache, and they diagnosed scarlet fever, and eventually the ear had to be lanced, and the family was gone. They had another place for them to live down closer to church, and I was in bed most of the time, and that was lousy. But we survived that one too, and in the whole thing, you got to say that I grew up poor. My dad never owned a house until 1946 when he was 68 years old, for crying out loud. Is that bad? We lived in rented houses. We never owned a car until late in the game. Dad was never much of a driver. We owned a car, but we could never really afford it. When us kids got out of the army, we bought a car and we drove the wheels off of it. But I didn't even have a driver's license when I was in the army. I never had a military driver's license. But and we moved from one rented house to another one, and eventually, when the boys went off to the army, Dad bought a lot from the college on the edge, just off campus, and he made a deal with the local lumber yard. He couldn't build any private homes during the war because that just wasn't done, and they would accumulate some materials so that after the war and when things opened up again, he could have a house built. And so Dad's house was built in 1946. 46 and 1864. I think that's right. That was a grand experience. Dad borrowed money from his kids to build his house, and he spent the rest of his life trying to pay it off, so that his wife would own the house she lived in. He's 15 years older than his wife, and his preoccupation with the business of paying off his house. I saw Dad doing the arithmetic. He knew every payment he made, and he knew what the interest was, and he knew how much he reduced the principal, and that house wasn't paid for until Dad died, and insurance finished it off. And it was many years before I got my $1,000 back. But that was no problem for me. Well, all right, I was, but no, that's the way it was. And I read in the thing later with my own marriage and my own family, we learned the luxury of austerity, how great it is to live simple. And we're still there. Well, the last people I know who had a marriage with who lived on 1 10-month income. My teaching salary was our only income until we started getting Social Security, and we just learned to live on that. And someplace along I picked up a very simple budgeting rule. It said the way to always have enough money is to look at what you've got, know your resources, know what your income is. Take the first 10% and give it away. Take the second 10% and put it into savings, and then figure out how to live on the rest, and how to make a life out of it. We weren't, well, actually, the second part of it was the toughest, but through most of the time there were retirement plans in the teaching business, and they would take some money out of salary and put it in the retirement fund. So to this day, I draw on my retirement fund from 25 years teaching at Wartburg College, and that's about the only thing we had for savings for a while. We did eventually build our own house, and we paid that off before I left Wartburg College. So we had savings in that sense, even if we didn't have a house anymore. Once we sold the house at a strange time in the history of this world. In 1979, if you wanted to borrow money, it cost you, but I wasn't borrowing any money. I had bought my house 20 years earlier, and I was paying decent interest rates, and I borrowed only under $20,000 to build that house, and I had a very good rate on the loan, and it was all paid off when I left Wartburg College. But when I sold my house, the interest rates were horrendous. I sold the house in 1980, I guess, and I was collecting interest. I never paid interest in my life. I collected it. I was rich. In the early 80s, interest rates, the prime rate was over 10%. And so that was my little cushion, and that's where those were my savings that tided me over until retirement time.
When you moved when the college moved, how did your life change? Since you went from such a big campus and then you moved, how did your life change?
Well, not much, frankly. The community was very much the same. The kids weren't that much wrapped up in church or college politics. And in Waverly, there was a Christian day school operated by the Lutheran Church in town, by the American Lutheran Church in town. And so I came to Waverly and enrolled in the 6th grade in St. Paul's Lutheran Day School. And my teacher was an old buddy of my mother from way back, Charlotte Becker. And Charlotte Becker was a crackerjack teacher and a great musician. And Charlotte Becker organized a junior choir that sang beautiful stuff. And we did a candlelight concert each year. And she was so professional musically that, man, I could do no wrong. when I graduated from the 8th grade, uh, I was not valedictorian of the class, but I was second. And I learned from my mother that Charlotte had come to her on this problem. Who's going to be the valedictorian of this class when they graduate from the 8th grade? Because Dick and Norman Fadler are tied neck and neck. Their grades are statistically a wash. And what should I do? And Mother said, give it to Norman, of course, because it doesn't mean anything to Dick. Norman has worked for it all the time, and it means everything to him, and Dick can take it or leave it. And so I was salutatorian and never cared a bit about that. I wound up marrying a valedictorian. Many years later, class of 48 in Preston, Minnesota, Millie Bolter was valedictorian at age 16. And she came to Wartburg that fall, and we met, and that's all there was to it. And boy, do I have a prize. Because the business of going to school, the priority of scholarship and reading and stuff became a part of our family, as it was always. So how did my life change when we came to Waverly? I just moved into another Lutheran community where education and music were big stuff. It was perfect.
You've mentioned that you had a very exciting childhood living on the college campuses, and you've mentioned some of the things you did, but what were all the activities that you would do as a child?
Okay, for one thing, we had the campus to ourselves. We had a big field just across the street from our house, where we could, if we wanted to play ball, we could play there. There's no danger of damaging the gym over there. We played hide and seek. We had a friend who lived across the field from us there on a farm where they raised corn, and they cut it by hand. And I remember one summer when we went over to Herring's, and we helped them harvest corn. And this was a riot. We were cutting the corn with the knife, and they'd bundle it up and they'd put it into tall corn shocks. And of course, the kids were young. We didn't use a big knife. We were just messing around mostly. And they had this big corn shock, which was just piled together with corn standing on the cut end and into a pile. And eventually somebody was going to take that apart and feed it to the cattle or something. But we got to play on that, you see. And we found that boy, these tall corn stalks, you could climb up to the top of this thing, and then you could burrow down into it, down to the ground, and come out. And we just had a riot with that thing. I don't know what we did to the corn, but that's the way we invented games, you see. down by the creek, we fished for bullheads. Now, we didn't have any fishing tackle. We bent stick pins. We actually caught fish on a bent stick pin. And then fish them out and bring them home. And you couldn't get Dad to kill them, because Dad wouldn't kill anything. He hated to swat flies. but we ate fish that we caught in Mill Creek. One time, the college English department put on a pageant down by the creek. They had gotten ambitious, and they had built an artificial lake adjacent to the creek. And they did the pageant of Hiawatha. And it was quite a grand production. And then they didn't know what to do with that lake after that. I guess the biology department had some fun with it. But one of our wildest adventures came during a winter when the lake on the little pond froze over with thick ice. And then somehow the water drained out from under it. And we got down there as kids, and we crawled under these slabs of ice. And this wonderland down there is lighted by the glass ceiling, you see. And the vegetation frozen down there, and it didn't belong there at all by any means, I assure you. But that was another thing I never shared with folks. Also, in the summertime, we liked that little pond, because among the things down there was the vessel that they had created to mix concrete. And this was 2 boards and a sheet of tin tied on the bottom. A boat. We went navigationing. And we would get into that cement mixer and shove it out on the lake and pull around. Never told the folks about that one either. But you see, we invented games as much as we played it. Sure, there were some games that games that we probably learned in school, you know, but as much as anything, we made them up ourselves. And since we had all different age levels, we just had to adapt everything to the age levels, and some would be in and some would be out. And this was a fun place. We got our exercise because I never measured the distance, but it must have been more than a mile to school. And we had 3 ways of getting to school. We could go down the hill to 19th Avenue and then cross over at Glufka's drugstore, and then you go down to the tracks. And the tracks, there was a little dinky that ran from the Collis Manufacturing Company downtown, and it took us to school. And if we took the dinky, we could get to school that way. It didn't cost much. The second way was you take the same start and you get to the grocery store, but you stay on the highway. You just take the highway down past the hospital and then take off and go down to school. That was walking all the way. And we did that more often than anything else. And if we did that, we walked with the 19th Street kids, the kids who lived out on that edge of town but weren't college. The third way was to go over by Herring's farm, across the farmland over there, and cut straight across behind the hill, and we'd come out before the hospital yet. And there was a neighborhood there where the Neubauers lived, and others, and the Cottermans, and we come out behind their house, and then we'd get on Lincoln Highway and go that way. So we had the cross the field route, the street route, and the dinky. We had 3 ways of walking to school. And I remember one occasion. I wouldn't have thought of it, but there was a kid lived on 19th in the 19th Street gang. I was walking home with him one day, and I was bending his ear, and I don't exactly remember what his name was, but it was something like Henry Walker. And Henry and I were just walking home, and I was boring him to tears. He just turned around and popped me in the nose. He said, "Shut up." Okay. That's all right. But we were a different bunch. We were raised by teachers and preachers, and a big family, and college students. Even the college students tolerated us. So whatever was wrong with our life, we didn't mind that because we had so many things going for us.
Okay. Could you explain for us what a dinky is?
A dinky is an interurban a tracked vehicle that runs either forward or backward. It's like a single train car, but it's electric, and it runs off a wire overhead for power, and the driver sits in the front of it and opens the door, and when he gets to the end of the line, he goes to the other end and he drives it from there. And the dinky was our interurban railroad.
Okay. What was the relationship like between the college kids and then the non-college kids of your age, the different communities of the town community and then the college community?
Okay, the college community was so small that it was trivial, and we had kids that we were in school with who lived down on 19th Street, for example. These were probably people whose parents worked at the Collis Manufacturing Company down there. And then on the way along Lincoln Highway, we passed this place where on the bluff above the highway where there's a row of houses, and that's where we came in over the fields. The Neubauers and the Cottermans. These are all buddies. We didn't have any trouble there at all. And just the fact that we would walk to school and back with them sometimes, and that we came through their backyard if we took that route. There wasn't the distinction between the college kids and the town kids that we had in Waverly later. In Waverly, the college was bigger compared to town, you see, and the college was different. They called the college community Kraut Hill. Okay, but that wasn't a problem either, really. We in Waverly, we all had paper routes sooner or later, and we were up in the morning early and delivering Des Moines registers. And so we got around with people. There were kids who lived near campus who weren't campus kids, who weren't college kids. And that wasn't really a problem for us.
Okay. When you were in school, did the teachers treat you any differently than the town kids?
I don't think so. I never heard of a school problem in Clinton. I remember I remember the schoolhouse, and I remember the second grade teacher particularly, and I remember the playground out and back. There was a major thoroughfare that went by the school, the full block there that was open, and we had a big playground back there, and I don't remember any difficulties at that school. I remember a little incident there. There was a time when the grass along the back street was a little long, and it was in summertime, and we discovered that the grass back there along the other road was full of garter snakes. And oh, the kids discovered garter snakes. No supervision whatever. What we did to those garter snakes, whap! We slaughtered garter snakes, but never knew that these are our friends. but I remember the summer of the garter snakes. Yeah.
What were your two schools like in grade school? Or what was your school like in grade school, and then in high school as far as size? How many kids were there?
Well, I think we must have had classes of around 20 in each place. I remember well-filled classrooms, and we hadn't got to the point where we are in Dakota now, where the schools are running out of kids. Well, let's face it, our family had 5 kids, and families of 3 and 4 kids were common. And besides, Clinton was a bigger town, and our elementary school was down in a residential area, so there's no shortage of population there. In Waverly, at the Christian Day School, at that time, we had good enrollment. There was no problem. We had such good teachers, for one thing. And so I suppose 15 to 20 was as big as a class would be in the Christian Day School. But there we had the elementary grades and the primary grades and the elementary grades, what we call middle school now, grades 6, 7, and 8, became a separate group later. But in the Christian Day School, I was always in a classroom with more than one grade. The one teacher would have 2 or 3 grades, and so I always got my work done, and I listened in on everything. So, shall we say I got a broader education? Okay.
What was the ethnicity composition of your classrooms?
In Waverly, in grades 6, 7, and 8, it was mostly German. Kraut Hill. This was the German Lutheran Church was the population base for it. There was also a Missouri Synod Church in town, which we had nothing to do with because there was no compatibility there. And I didn't know anything about that most of the time. And I think that the organization in Waverly at that time, the elementary schools, was such that the parochial school was lumped together with the rural schools under a county superintendent. And so we we were a very good mixture of town and rural, town and farm. More of the kids walked or ran to school from the farm, but that was a different era. In Clinton, I was in the Christian day school only for, I think, a part of 1 year, but it was good for me. I liked that. No problems.
You mentioned the farm kids coming in. Was there ever any problems between the city kids and the farm kids?
No, no. We were that wasn't in Clinton. That was just in Waverly. Waverly was a small town of a couple of thousand people, but the church was a big one, and we had a lot of farm kids in church and in the parochial school. There's no problem between farm kids and town kids there. What they call Waverly, the dairy spot of Iowa, and the place was essentially rural.
Okay. What was your favorite subject in school?
Math and physics. In high school, I liked physics the best. Well, this was just made for me. But I liked Latin. I took Latin for 2 years in high school, and I liked that. I had to work at it very hard, but I liked it. And I liked math and science. And that was where I first became aware of the problem with science in American public schools. You know what the problem is? Coaches. My 9th grade general science teacher was a great disappointment to me. He was a very popular coach, but he wasn't much of a science teacher. And when I asked a good question, he would be as likely to dismiss it as smartass as to give me a good answer. It began to dawn on me that that's one of the problems in our public schools. And fortunately, my science teacher, when I got to chemistry and physics, was a good one. Prof. Letzler, the daughter in my class, too, and he understood, and he was a good teacher. So I enjoyed chemistry and physics classes, not because of the foolishness of the class, but because we had a good teacher. And my respect for Prof. Letzler was always top drawer, but it peaked on one very special occasion. There were a bunch of boys in the physics class, as you might expect, and the class was, the prof had his desk down in front, and then we were on tiered levels up in front of him, and so he had everything right in front of him there. And there was one day when the physics class, was just not behaving. Nobody seemed to be in a mood to behave. And he got so sick and tired of us that he walked out on us. And we felt so bad, we knuckled down and went to work. Now there's a teacher. Many years later, I was teaching physics in Esterville Junior College, and I had the physics lab and office next door to it, and there was a coach in the room next to me. And he borrowed my classroom for a period to show a movie. I was also in charge of the movie projectors. And so I let Bill use my physics lab for his social studies class. And he had the problem that Prof. Letzler had had. His class was in no mood to sit there and watch a movie. Anyway, I asked him after, said, Bill, how'd the movie go? Well, the movie was all right, but it didn't go well at all. What's the matter? It's the kids. What's the matter? Well, we had the movie going, we were going along here, fine. I hear this tittering in the class, and I look, and there's, in the back row, here's a kid, he's got a girl in his lap, and they're naked. Oh, he says, I stopped the music, and I stopped the film, and I bawled him out, and moved him, and we went back to the film, and it went on, and it was going all right. And then I hear this tittering in class again. Here's the same guy with a different girl on his lap, and they're naked. As I got so mad, I just walked out. He was not there the next year. Not that is not everybody's game. You don't always get the support of your students by walking out on them.
All right. Did you have any least favorite subjects in school?
Least favorite subject in school, strangely, was probably history. Didn't have anything against it, but my history teacher took it up with me one day. She says, you could get A's in this class if you wanted to, but you're never worth more than a B. I said, I enjoy the class, but it just doesn't excite me that much. And I suppose that's the one I'd have to nominate. I felt bad for Miss Hamill, but he said, you just aren't producing for me. Sorry about that. So you'll have to settle for B's. Millie would have got A's.
What type of student were you in school?
Just like that. I liked Latin, but I didn't work at it very hard. That's the only class I ever got thrown out of. Ms. Wagner was a Latin teacher, and she seemed to be having a good time teaching Latin, and I was having a ball with it, but I didn't work at it very hard. And one day she started the class by addressing me directly. And she says, Dick Wiederanders, do you have your derivatives done for today? No. Go to study hall and do them. Don't want you around. That's the kind of student I was. But I got good grades in Latin. And in high school, I learned, I was a good test taker. And in the Iowa schools in 1938 to 42, they had an every school and every pupil's testing program. And you took standardized tests in every subject that you took. And then they took the top 50 grades in each subject for the whole state, and they put on a banquet in honor of them. And as a freshman, I went to the state in 3 of my 4 subjects. I don't know which one I missed. That was typical. In the sophomore year, I went in 2 subjects. In the junior year, I went in 1 subject. The senior year, they quit the program because they had people studying for the tests, boning up on the tests, you know. The testing program was failing. And that was, as long as the thing was new to everybody, then I aced it out. But as soon as they started zeroing in on the tests, instead of teaching the subject, then I couldn't compete. And that again is the coaches. They know how to win a game. See, you scout out the team and you win the game, but but you miss the purpose of the whole thing. See how I learned to be a teacher? I learned by watching teachers.
Did you have a lot of homework?
No. I typically didn't have a lot of homework because I got most of it done in class or in study hall. That was a good deal.
All right. Let's turn a little bit to religion, since it was such a prominent part of your life. How important was religion during your childhood?
Very. As an individual, I never fought it. I went with it all the way. I liked the music, but I never had any trouble with the theology either. What's maybe mysteries incomprehensible for somebody didn't bother me. And besides, all the nicest people to me were religious people. I never experienced religious pressures. It was easy. I didn't have any trouble memorizing, although I didn't do a lot of it. But where was this? Many years later, when I was working, when I was attending school at Minnesota, and I shifted over to the education department from the physics department. I took a course in philosophy. And having no background in philosophy whatever, I enrolled in this course with a teacher who liked to have us write papers. And so I had to write a paper on my philosophy of life, and it reflected my religious training very closely. And I got an A on the paper. So we'll just wrap it up at that, huh?
You mentioned when your family split that the ACLs went north. What denomination is that?
They were Lutherans all, but the Lutheran Church has two separate groups. There's the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has been one body since time began, and they have changed as little as possible. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America is the result of the merger of the United Lutheran Church and the American Lutheran Church and the Evangelical Lutheran Church, I believe, from out. Anyway, it's several different churches with more diverse background, and has always been more liberal in its interpretations and in its practices and its policies. And when Millie and I went down to Texas to visit her sister who was living in San Antonio at the time, we went down into the region where the Wiederanders had come into Texas with my family book, and I was looking for people and places. And I ran into a man of about my age who, well, the family numbers tell the story. My number is 1873. I'm the third child of the seventh child of the eighth child of number one who came over. his number was, although he was about my same age, his number is 11623. He was the third child of the second child of the sixth child of number 1. So he was an extra generation ahead of me and down the line, you see. And he was really a historian for the 116 family. See, I'm in the 187 family. And the 116 family got down the line a lot faster. And we had an interesting visit. He was at the time a college administrator, college admissions, and I visited with him. He was unmarried, and he stayed that way. But we discussed a little bit the difference in character between the Missouri Synod and the ALC. On another occasion, I got a phone call from another man about my age whose dad had been a vice president in the Missouri Synod. And he had his dad's name and was living in his dad's house after his dad's death. And he had attended seminary to follow in his dad's footsteps. But he couldn't stomach it, and he just quit and was making a living driving a truck. He says, they're too strict. The Missouri Synod is just too hard-nosed. So that says it pretty well, huh?
All right.
Why I'm so glad I got in this with the gang I did.
How often did your family attend church?
Always. We don't as often anymore, but then my dad died at the age of 72 and I'm 83. And, things change a little. No, going to church was a solid part of the schedule.
What were the seating arrangements like at the church?
Now, as far as I can remember, when we lived in Clinton, back in the late 20s and early 30s, they may still have been seating men and women on different sides. But I'm not sure about that. But they got straightened out.
Were you able to question your religious teachings at all?
You see, in the ALC and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, there's less of that going on because there's a much greater tolerance for different people's different take on things. And you don't have the doctrinal disputes that you have in the Missouri Synod. And that's one thing that's a very characteristic difference. Lutheran churches across the country differ in that respect from one extreme to the other. I think the Wisconsin Synod is probably even stricter than the Missouri Synod. But at one time, the Missouri Synod would not allow any of their pastors to do any church business with pastors outside the Missouri Synod. That kind of thing. That's a pretty tough bunch from our point of view.
Okay. Was the German language ever used in church worship or prayers?
In my time, no. There were German services and there were English services, but there was never not an English service. There was never a time when, in order to go to church, I had listened to German.
What was your most stressful childhood experience?
My most stressful childhood experience. Well, first of all, I'll have to say that doesn't immediately ring any bells. My life was not stressful. I suppose that the most stressful childhood experience was connected with that scarlet fever, when I was concerned about passing my grade, having missed so much school, and I did have outside assignments to do. That was the toughest of them all.
Okay. This might be hard to answer, but what was your happiest childhood memory?
My happiest childhood memory. Oh boy. um, it would have to be something at home. It would have to be time at home with the family together, and mother playing the piano, and I'd wander over there and sing. Maybe two of the other kids would come, and we'd just be having fun together. And that's how I was living.
All right. What was the most adventurous thing you did during childhood?
During childhood, well, the most adventurous stuff was down by the creek there. As a child, uh, this is strictly kid stuff, but we were out of sight from the campus altogether, down in the woods, down by the creek, and making up our own stuff. And those were real adventures for us. Uh, I don't remember anything else that would qualify that well.
Is there anything else about your childhood memories that you'd like to share with us?
Childhood memory. I picked up a couple of them along the way there. Let's see. I think that covers it pretty well.
Okay. Why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
Because a good story is always worth telling. That's first of all. Hey, I grew up in the church where telling stories is the essence of life. And a story is not just to be told once. A good story ought to live on. And I'm going to tell you somebody else's story that I picked up once. We were going to and from the cabin as a family. We were in Moose River, I think, Minnesota. And we stopped on a Sunday afternoon on our way home at a restaurant for our Sunday dinner. And there was a family in there having a family reunion. And they had come to the same restaurant to have a family reunion. And they were all hooping it up in there. And we couldn't help hearing the stories. And they were just telling family stories like crazy. And that's when we heard about Uncle George. And here's the story about Uncle George. It seems that in his advancing years, Uncle George got a little bit less able to take care of himself, and they had to have someone living with him. And he had this two-story house, and he slept upstairs. He could get up and down the stairs all right, but they felt that somebody else ought to be in the house with him. And one night, the person downstairs heard noises, strange noises upstairs. They wondered, what's going on? What's with Uncle George? And there was a louder noise. He must have fallen. I'll go up and check on him. went up and looked in his room, and there was Uncle George helping a woman in the window. That cracked us all up. See, storytelling? Why not?
All right. Are there any other thoughts or observations that you'd like to share with us today?
Well, as you can tell, I've shared some of these stories with people at my class reunions, and even at Millie's class reunions, and we always do, of course, in the family. Now when our kids come back, I hear stories about when they were growing up that I never heard before, and my kids all gravitated to history. When Millie got a degree, the same year I got my doctorate, she had to get it in secondary education or in elementary education because that's where she started. It would go through faster, but she really wanted a history degree. When her daughter Jane worked her way through college after she left home down in Georgia, and she got her degree just recently. She got a degree in history. And now, the youngest, son Kurt, the one in Des Moines, is getting his master's degree in history. I come by it naturally. We like storytelling. Besides, Millie's chief avocation is reading. Millie reads 100 books a year, and I read a few of them. And the appreciation for a good story, it runs deep in our family. Okay?
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you for spending time with us today and sharing all of your wonderful stories. So thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for coming, guys.